For years, Hunter had been a silent spectator of life's comings and goings from behind cold, rusty bars. Day after day, people were walking around the aisle of the shelter, stopping in front of the cages of playful puppies, jumping and licking with enthusiasm. The laughter were frequent, the quick decisions. In a matter of minutes, a dog was going home, but it was never him. Hunter tried many things at first, lifting a paw, wagging a tail, emitting a soft bark, even sitting in position. Perfect, waiting for a sign of interest. Nothing. The constant indifference was extinguishing her energy, and with her time, he gave up. He no longer approached the fence. He just watched. The shelter, with its scent of disinfectant and echoes of distant barking, became her whole world. Hope, that rebellious spark, had been extinguished. The volunteers who came in to clean or feed knew his name, and some would even bend down to give him a quick pet, but Hunter didn't respond. It was as if it was no longer there completely. His body was still present, but his soul, numbed by waiting, had sought refuge in some corner invisible. Every time a new buddy reached the next cage, Hunter looked without trial, and when they were carrying, it barely turned the head. It had been turned a ghost inside his own story, an invisible dog in a place where everyone longed to be seen. The routine was so predictable that every new bark no longer altered. At that point, living was just about enduring, another day, until it happened the unexpected. A couple stopped right in front of him without looking at the rest, and for the first time in a long time, Hunter raised the head. If you ever felt like something forgotten deserved a second chance, this might be the time to share it. Emily and Daniel didn't seem rushed. They weren't faking enthusiasm. They looked at him as if he really did. They saw. They spoke with the person in charge of the refuge. They pointed out their cage and asked for their history. The man, with a mixture of surprise and tenderness, he said that Hunter had been there for more than 6 years there, without none interested serious. While we're listening, Emily crouched down, looking at him eyes without touch it, and said in a low voice, If you want, we'll take you home." Hunter didn't move. He was paralyzed, confused. I didn't understand if it was real. When the gate opened and the belt rodeo his, Neki did not oppose resistance, but also showed joy. He walked with stiff steps, the heart beating like a silent alarm. I didn't know if I did something good or if it was another disappointment. But something in the way Daniel held the strap, without jerks, with respect, made me think that maybe, just maybe, this time it was different. The walk to the car was short, but for Hunter, it was like crossing into another world. The sun in his fur, it made him squint eyes. The smell of the outdoors, of trees, of earth, everything was new and yet distant, like an ancient memory. Daniel opened the door rear of the car and waited. Hunter hesitated. The dark interior, you remembered his last trip, the day in which they left in a shelter, still could hear the screams, the door closing, the engine moving away without looking back. But now, there was silence. Just an outstretched hand and a calm voice saying, "Come on, old friend." He got in. He settled down in a blanket and stayed very still, feeling every curve, every break, as if it were a test. When the car stopped and saw a green, large garden with flowers and a low fence, something in his chest vibrated. He didn't understand what it was, but it looked like much to the hope. The first one's days in the new house was a mixture of discovery and fear. Hunter explored every corner cautiously, smelling the ground, the furniture, the corners. He didn't bark, he didn't play, he didn't ask for anything. He slept in strategic corners from where he could see without being seen. He didn't touch her bed, although Emily, he had prepared carefully, with soft blankets and an old stuffed animal. He only ate when everyone was asleep. Every new sound it toward tense up. The bell rings door it paralyzed. Emily's hugs at the beginning they were pushing back. Daniel and Emily, they knew they didn't. They pressed it. They let it be. They spoke to him. They sat quietly, close but not intruding. They waited, and little by little, that framed the difference. One night, while Emily was reading in the couch, Hunter approached. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't look for attention, just supported the head in the edge of the cushion. Without make noise, Emily didn't move. She just smiled. That small gesture was a break. To the tomorrow next, he ate while Daniel was having breakfast. And on the third day, when Daniel took the leash, Hunter didn't run away. He walked up to him, slowly. In the park, did not do a lot at first. He sniffed, he walked close. But as he saw other dogs running, something caught his eye. He drove, he ran, as he did since he was young. He ran clumsily, with stiff legs, but with the free soul. Emily cried without him, it knew. Daniel clapped as if he had won a marathon. And Hunter, panting, with the language outside, that looked as if finally understood, there was lived. Again, this scene touch you, maybe. Someone else needs see it. Send it to whoever you believe that the eye would understand. With he. As the weeks passed, Hunter began to transform. He was no longer the dog that had hidden in the shadows. He began to look for contact, to follow Emily around the house, to lay his head in the Daniel's legs while he worked in his desk. He got used to the sounds of the home, the doorbell, the washing machine, the coffee maker. He was no longer hiding. His tail, which had remained motionless for years, was now wagging with frequency. I played with his toys, although at first he didn't understand very good that do with they. When achieved, bounce a ball and run after it, she barked with a hoarse voice as if rediscovering his instinct. Sometimes he would stop suddenly, look around, as if surprised by itself, same. I was learning to be happy, but the happiness was not constant euphoria. It also came with moments of doubt, of insecurity. One afternoon, listening a bang, strong, Hunter hid under the dining room table, trembling. Emily crouched nearby, touch him, just saying, everything is fine, nothing is wrong. He looked, still with afraid, but he didn't run away. He was an important moment, because that time he chose stay. With each of those gestures, Hunter healed, and so did his humans. Daniel, who had grown without pets, he was surprised at how much that dog he taught about presence, about silence, about love without words. Emily, who had suffered anxiety for years, I found in Hunter an anchor. When I saw her breathing peacefully at his side, also I found peace. The house was no longer just a space with furniture and routines. It was a refuge shared by three beings who had chosen each other unconditionally. When arrived he autumn, with its dry leaves covering he garden and the earlier sunsets, something changed in Hunter's gaze. He was no longer observing with distrust, but with calm. His gait was firmer, his stronger body. Emily used to feel with he and a porch at the end of the day, and although they did not speak, they shared a meaningful silence. Daniel began to carry it in longer walks, and Hunter responded like a veteran explorer, sniffing every corner, cautiously greeting other dogs, accepting petting from children with a patience that only the old people, wise men they know. He was no longer a shelter dog. He was part of life, of the streets, of the neighborhood. It was known for the neighbors like the noble, and there was no who wouldn't smile at seeing him pass. One afternoon, Emily found a box old with photos of Hunter in a shelter. The there was received by mail as part of the adoption process. The looked with he heart tight. The contrast was brutal, that hunched dog with the dull eyes, almost unrecognizable. He called Daniel, and together they hit in an improvised mural in the kitchen, along with images. Current, Hunter running in the park, asleep under the blanket, looking out the car window. I do they did to remember the pain, but to honor the journey, so that they would never forget where came. Hunter walked past the photos. He sniffed, and then lay down beside them, as if he understood that this past no longer belonged. His history was changing, and now had witnesses. With the winter arrive also a new stage. Hunter, who previously feared the noises from abroad, now barked with security when I listened steps unknown, protected his home, but without aggressiveness, like someone who knows he finally has something to take care of. They had bought him a coat for the day's cold, and although at first he resisted, He ended up loving him. He went out into the garden, even with snow, and it stayed there, looking at the horizon, as if I were thanking Emily. I took pictures and shared with her friends, saying, "They don't know it, how beautiful it is to have it here." He didn't need to understand the words, the felt. Every gesture, every look, every caress was a reminder that he was no longer alone, and that it was enough. One day, Emily organized a small meeting at home. There was laughter, new people, children running around. Hunter, who would have previously looked for a corner to hide, walked among them with tranquility. He let himself be petted. He even played a little with a girl who offered breadcrumbs. It was so when a woman, a friend of Emily, asked, "Where did you get it? It's so quiet, so sweet." Emily, without doubt, he replied, "Of a shelter. He was carrying years waiting. I just needed a home." The woman looked with astonishment, as if I could not believe it. And Hunter, without knowing it, had just inspired someone else, because that woman decided, days then, visit the same shelter. And although she didn't adopt a dog like Hunter, she did take in a puppy, scared, giving it to him. Also, the chance at a new life. Hunter never knew that detail, but its history already began to touch other lives. The days followed its course, but something in the house had changed forever. Hunter had become the silent center of the home. I didn't need do a lot to fill the spaces. It was enough his presence, his slow breathing, the rhythmic sound of his steps on the hallway. Emily said that since he arrived, was sleeping better. Daniel, who used to arriving late and stressed of the work, now was passing by first to greet him, even before changing. It was as if Hunter had brought with him a new way of looking at life, slower, more present, more grateful. Every walk was an opportunity to observe, to stop and smell a flower, to sit under a tree. Emily and Daniel began to make it same. Sometimes they joked, saying that he was training, but not everything was perfect. There was a dawn when Hunter began to cry. In dreams, moved paws, moaned. Emily woke up and sat down next to her. She didn't touch him, just speak softly, as if I could reach it in that dark world where still lived part of his past. That night, slept together in a living room floor, she with a blanket, he curled up next to him. By the morning, Hunter woke up first, looked, and for the first time licked his hand. It was a small gesture, but to Emily, it meant everything. As if he said, "Thank you for staying." Those moments, more than the walks or pretty photos, were those who built the bond, because healing wasn't just about leaving his refuge, it was trust again, and that Hunter toward day by day, bark by bark, look by look. If you got here, maybe this story, it's already transforming you. Tell us which part touched you the most. With the arrival of spring, Hunter seemed rejuvenate. Your walks were longer, their movements more agile. Sometimes he ran after butterflies or rolled around in the grass with a funny clumsiness. Emily observed with a mixture of tenderness and pride, as if seeing something bloom that had been dormant for too long. One day, while they watered his garden, Daniel commented, "Do you realize that now he takes care of us?" And it was true. Hunter had become a protective presence, not just physically but emotionally. He knew when Emily was sad before her same. She came closer, snuggled up, and didn't move until she was breathing. Calmly, it was as if understood, with that silent wisdom of old dogs, which meant belong to someone. One afternoon, Emily decided to take him to the shelter, just to visit. There was spoken with the volunteers who wanted to see it, know how was. When they arrived, Hunter stopped in the entrance. It didn't shake, but it didn't shake either. Advanced right away. He sniffed the air, looked at Emily, and then entered with firm step. Some dogs barked. Others approached curiously. He did not respond. He walked to his old cage, which now was empty, and stayed there for a few seconds. Then he turned and left straight towards a little girl who was trembling in a corner. He sniffed her and then lay down beside her. Emily couldn't contain the tears. The volunteers, they looked, moved, one of them. He whispered, "It's like I know exactly what she feels." And perhaps, it knew, because Hunter had been there. And now, on the other hand, could offer the most valuable thing he had, comfort. After that visit, something sparked in Emily. He began collaborating with the shelter as a volunteer. I went once a week, carried blankets, helped with the walks, spoke with the dogs, and always, he was carrying pictures of Hunter, presented as an example, as proof that the transformation was possible. Daniel also joined in, repairing fences, installing fans, donating food. But beyond the actions, what inspired most was the history. The volunteers, they began to notice a change as people looked at the older dogs or the more timid ones. They saw them as impossible cases. They began to imagine what they could do, become, all for a dog that a day was invisible and now shone like a beacon. At home, life went on his course. Hunter had his routines, walks along the morning, naps in the sun, visits to the park, but also had his secret rituals. Every night, after dinner, he would approach the photo wall in the kitchen, the sniffed it he looked, and then lay down in the carpet. It was his way of closing the day. Emily said it was as if he same will review his history, remembering that this past no longer defined, but yes, it had forged. Daniel, on the other hand, believed it was an act of gratitude, that Hunter knew perfectly how lucky he was, and that's why he lived with such intensity every day. And maybe they both had reason, because since it came out of the shelter, Hunter had not lost nor a single moment to prove that he was worth it. It was worth the wait. That even after years of neglect, it was still possible to start over. One morning, while Emily was sweeping his porch, found Hunter watching the darling with a profound stillness. He didn't bark, he didn't move, he just stared. It was as if we're listening to something she couldn't hear. He sat down next to her, caressed her back, and he, without taking his eyes off the horizon, barely moved his tail. It was one of those simple moments which don't seem big from the outside, but which mark a life. Because at that moment, Emily understood that Hunter was no longer just an adopted dog. He was a teacher. He had taught to stop, to feel, to listen the silence. He had taught to heal without hurry, and above all, to love without expecting anything in return. With he passed of the time, they arrived also the years. Hunter's fur turned whiter, his steps slower, but his gaze remained just as luminous. Emily and Daniel knew they wouldn't have decades with each other, but that does not sadden, because they had learned to measure the time not in quantity, but in depth. Every day with he was a complete gift. They celebrated the adoption anniversaries as if they were birthday, with cookies special and long walks. And every night, before going to sleep, Emily whispered in my ear, "Thank you for choosing us." Hunter was no longer hiding, no longer fearing, no longer waiting, because he had arrived at the place he had always dreamed of, a home where he was seen, loved, and above all, understood. A place where, finally, he was simply Hunter. Summer afternoon, while rested under his favorite tree of the garden, Hunter had a special visitor. A young neighbor who used to pass running every day way to the school, stopped, bent down, and caressed tenderly. "My mom, he says you are the dog that changed everything." He whispered. Hunter didn't understand the words, but perceived the tone, the intention. He replied with a slight movement of the tail and supported his head in the leg of the boy. That moment, brief and unexpected, summed up his legacy. Because what Hunter had achieved was not limited to his family. It was a silent seed planted in every person who crossed his path, living proof that tenderness has no age, that the resilience exists, and that true love does not need make noise to transform. Do you know someone who hasn't found their home? This story could be the push you need. With the years, the shelter began to use his history as a symbol. There was a picture of him in the entry, next to the phrase, "It's never too late to start over." Emily wrote a small text that accompanied the image, counting its journey from the most forgotten cage to becoming in the soul of a home. Many adopters were excited to read it, and more than one asked about him. Some they thought that even was available, and knowing that he lived happily with his family, they smiled because the hunter's story wasn't just a nice anecdote. It was a constant reminder that every life, no matter how broken it may seem, can start over. And sometimes all you need is to look with the heart open. One particularly cold winter, Hunter fell ill. It wasn't sudden, but rather a series of days. Slower, shorter walks, heavier breathing. Emily and Daniel, they noticed right away. They took it to the vet. They covered with more care. They adjusted the house so that I could move without effort. But they did not try to fight the time. They accompanied him. They hugged. They were present. Hunter slept more, ate less. But every time someone sat next to him, he raised his head. The head, as if saying, "I am fine. I'm at home." He never stopped looking at me with love. He never had it again, fear. Because this time, at the end of the path, I was not alone. I was surrounded by everything a day dreamed have. The last night, it was quiet. The fireplace was lit, the house was silent. Emily was stroking him the head, while Daniel spoke in a low voice. Hunter closed the eyes slowly, with a long sigh. There was no drama nor urgency, just a break, just peace. By dawn, he was no longer breathing, but his body continued warm, as if love still it wrapped. Emily cried silently, holding him for hours. Daniel prepared a space in a garden, under the tree where so much liked to sleep. Wrapped in your favorite blanket, they left her stuffed animal and planted flowers around it. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a thank you, because Hunter wasn't really gone. His presence continued in every corner of the house, in every patient gesture, in every act of tenderness that he them taught without words. They passed the months, but nobody in that house became the same again. Same. Emily, who always had been, sensitive but anxious, now found calm in the little things. I prepared the coffee with more affection, went out for a walk without looking at the clock. He stopped to greet the dogs of the neighborhood. Daniel, who lived submerged in lists and emails. I had learned to disconnect, to listen more, to embrace without reason. Sometimes in silence, the two would sit in the porch and look toward the tree where Hunter was resting. They didn't talk. There was no need to. Their absence was not a emptiness, it was a distinct presence, a form of love that remained beyond of the body. The volunteers of the shelter, they continued to tell their history. Now they had even created a small program to promote the adoption of older dogs, and they called it Project Hunter. Many people came to the shelter looking for a puppy, and they left with a companion with a wise look and tired legs. Some they adopted, moved by the history, others simply because something in those sad eyes remembered that we all need a second chance. Emily and Daniel visited from time to time when they were wearing donations, hugged the new adopters, and every time they saw an older dog leave, they knew something of Hunter was going to in that journey. That her life had not only been saved, but had become a beacon for many more. One day a letter arrived in the mail. It was from a family who had adopted a little dog. Blind thanks to the Hunter Project, they said how, at the beginning, it had been difficult, but how every little bit of progress helped them. He remembered that life is not measured by what is missing, but by what is given. At the end of the letter, there was a phrase written with streak trembling for the youngest son. "Thank you for teaching us that everyone deserves to be chosen." Emily the read out loud with tears in the eyes, and the pasted next to the photo wall. Now, next to the Hunter images, too, there were letters, drawings, stories. The kitchen had been transformed into a simple but powerful altar, where memory did not hurt. It inspired. Years after, in a walking through the park, Emily and Daniel saw a woman elderly with an old dog in arms. They stopped, talked, shared experiences. The woman, he smiled and said, "I adopted because of a story I read on the internet about a dog named Hunter." They didn't say anything right away. They just smiled. They looked at each other, and they felt something deep move in the chest, because they understood that although time had passed, Hunter continued there. In every tender step, in every act of compassion, it wasn't just a rescued dog, it was a silent teacher, a symbol that it's never too late to love or to be loved. Hunter's story has no sad ending because his legacy continues beating. In every human who decides to look beyond the age, of the scars, of the fear, in every dog that comes out of a shelter not in a hurry, but with dignity. Because loving someone like Hunter is also loving yourself, discovering that the strongest bond does not need words, just presence, just surrender. And so, between photos, memories, and new stories that flourish in their step, Hunter follows walking, not by the streets, not by the garden, but by the hearts that he touched. Because there are lives that do not end with the death, they just change shape, and they stay forever where they matter most, in what they transformed. If this story it's with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment or share it with who also believes that it is never too late to love.